Welcome to our program, Achieving Your Highest Business Value, sponsored by Nath, Goldberg Meyer, a boutique intellectual property law firm. I'm Bruce Stout, and I'm the director of the Rainmakers Forum, and I'll be the moderator for this program. Realizing optimized business valuations is a vital concern for business owners. Today, we are going to address tactics that may help increase those business valuations. Ignored intellectual property, economic incentive programs, and missed tax planning opportunities are just a few examples of the kinds of issues that impact valuation. I'm delighted to have our panelists introduce themselves to you, starting with Howard Kline. Howard, please tell us about you.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Howard Kline. I am a partner at Nath, Goldberg Meyer, and I run the trademark and copyright department there. Nath, Goldberg Meyer is a boutique intellectual property law firm based in Alexandria, Virginia, and we specialize in procuring patent, trademark, and copyrights for clients all over the United States and world.
Thank you. Next would be Darek Hahn.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and I just want to make sure you know that nobody stabbed me in the back with the scissors that are behind me. That's actually from our ribbon cutting ceremony 4 years ago. That they ended up on the wall, and they perfect for this setting. I'm the president and CEO of Catapult Acquisition Corp. We do business as VelocIT, and we are an IT services firm. We do IT support and IT security and all those things around all things IT.
Okay, good. Mandeep, please tell us about you.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Mandeep Trivedi, and I head up the valuation practice at Citrin Cooperman. We're a traditional tax and accounting firm with a large consulting aspect to it. I primarily value privately held businesses, assets, and securities for a variety of different reasons, and looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you. And finally, we have Elman Woodson.
Hi, my name is Elman Woodson. First, Bruce and Howard, thank you for hosting this. My name is Elman Woodson. I'm the principal at Woodson Law, and we focus on business law, real estate, as well as estate planning. And most of my business clients are in the range of 1 to 5 million deal size. So I'm very excited to be here, and I look forward to having a great discussion.
Thank you. So let's start with our general question for our business valuation specialist, Mandeep. Mandeep, what drives value for a business? And for that matter, what derails value?
That's a great question, Bruce, and it's one of the topics I enjoy most talking to business owners and advisors to business owners about, because I truly believe that over the life and course of your business, you can do and enact things that will help you maximize the value if and when you intend to sell the business. And a lot of times what happens is business owners might wait till it's too late to extract the maximum value. So if there's nothing else that you take away from my contribution to today's panel discussion, I hope you remember these three things. And that is that value is driven by cash flow. So a business that generates profits is going to be more valuable than one that does not. That value is driven by growth. So a growing business is going to be more valuable than a business that's not growing. And a business that is able to mitigate the risks associated with both the growth and the cash flow is going to be more valuable. And, you know, risk is one of those areas that business owners actually do have the capacity to manage and contribute and control to a certain degree. Some risks, like global macro risks, are not within the control of a business owner, but understanding how those factors impact your business and how to protect your business from that is really important. Industry-specific risks, like regulations that might be specific to your industry, or supplier risk, understanding where those risks are and how to manage those are really important. But the risks that a business owner has the most or the greatest ability to mitigate or monitor or at least control to a certain degree are what we call company-specific risks. So these are risks such as, you know, making sure there's a depth of a management team if you're looking to sell your business at some point, so that you as a business owner transfer your knowledge and know-how to the actual business if you don't intend to continue to operate the business after you sell. making sure that if you have key employees, those employees and the risks associated with those employees are protected. And that really involves a whole team of advisors around you to make sure that that happens through legal contracts and other elements. Understanding your customer makeup and the risk associated with concentration or having, too many eggs in one basket, as you might say. How do you manage that risk? Well, that also involves perhaps contractual relationships with your customers so that if you sell the business, those customers will actually go with the new buyer. Understanding the competitive risk of your business, meaning who is your competition and how do you differentiate yourself from your competition is really, really important. And these are all things that you can understand over the life and course of the business. It doesn't have to be done at the 11th hour when you're looking to sell. Supplier risk, understanding where your products or materials are coming from and how do you mitigate the risk in the event that there are some issues with your suppliers. And then there's a risk that business owners don't always think about until the 11th hour. And that's things like internal controls, making sure you have the financial reporting systems in place that when a buyer asks you for information, you're able to readily provide that information, making sure your financial house is in order. Two, the second risk that sometimes gets ignored and couldn't be more important to manage is IT risk, the risks associated with cyber attacks. And I know we'll get into that further within the panel, but it's become such an important area to manage that if you don't, you could really derail value very quickly and significantly for that matter. And finally, legal risk. Managing the risks associated with many of those elements involve, working with a lawyer to make sure those risks are mitigated in some way. But also, most people think about legal risk as litigation, but it's also protecting what you have built. And that means protecting things that don't show up on your balance sheet, don't show up on your financial statements. And that's all the intangible assets that business owners have built in the life and course of their business. How are those assets being protected? And to ensure that when the business is sold, those assets get sold and that value is realized. So like I said, all of these risk factors can be managed in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't always happen on day one. It may not happen halfway through the life of the business, but hopefully by the end of the life of the, not the life of the business, but the business in your hands before you sell it, the risks have been mitigated, cash flows have been focused on, and growth is an area that you're able to share with a potential buyer.
So let's talk about cash flow for a second. So I know, because I was in practice many years myself, that closely held business owners have a tendency to drain the cash out of the business. Whether it's the Mercedes lease or what other activities are happening. And so all of a sudden, the cash flow is not as robust as it should be at time of sale. So now the valuation begins to drop. How do you manage that problem?
So it's really important to understand what we call is representative income. And so when you're talking to a buyer is really interested in knowing what they're going to be able to extract from the business in the future. And historically, you may not be able to show that in the form of your tax returns because the income might not be there to showcase because some of these elements that you mentioned, whether it be owner's perquisites or compensation, have drained the cash flows. So one of the things that we talk to business owners about, or advisors to business owners, is to make sure you understand what those perquisites are. Make sure you are able to document them so you can articulate that to a buyer in the form of what we call add backs. So yeah, this is my income, but when you add back these items that you as a new business owner won't have to expend, this is what the true earning power of the business is. So it's really understanding that when you first start your business or you inherit your business or you maybe even acquire a business, you may not be in the framework of selling the business. And you may indeed run these expenses through the business, which is very, very common. But at some point you have to start planning for an exit, and that shouldn't happen in the last 6 months. It shouldn't happen in the last year. Ideally, you're looking at a 3-year window to get your house in order. And that may also mean taking your cash-based tax returns and start looking at accrual-based financial statements you can match your revenue to your expenses, and also maybe even more formalized financial statements. They're working with advisors that will help you articulate the true earning power of the business.
That's great advice. So what do you do with the business owner that comes to you and says, my business is worth $20 million, and you know that in fact, in valuing it, it's worth $12 million. How do you manage those unreasonable expectations with a business owner?
That's a great question. And I will tell you that one of the things that we talk about to business owners is benchmarking yourself. How do you know you're worth 10 million or 12 million or 20 million for that matter if you don't know how you compare to your competition? So we'll share with them, industry statistics that show what margins should be, and we have access to databases that actually track sales of privately held companies. And we can tell them what other companies like theirs are selling for, but also show to them what kind of margins those companies were able to extract from their business. And that kind of sometimes can put them in the right frame of mind to see that they're not as strong, or more perhaps they are stronger than the industry. But that's one of the things from a business owner's perspective, you should not be doing at the 11th hour. There are resources out there. There are people out there that can help you get those statistics. So as you're looking at your business year over year, how do you compare to your competition? How do you compare to your industry? And if you're falling behind, what can you do to improve that? That will move you along that spectrum of maximum value as you are at par or superior to your industry.
That's why 3 years rather than 6 months.
Yes, yes.
But typically a business owner comes to you not 3 years earlier or 5 years earlier, but closer to that year or 6 months, when a lot of this is a little bit too late. How do you manage expectations then?
Well, the only thing that we can do is design a cash flow model to showcase to them, where there are deficiencies. It's very difficult when the client wants to sell their business in 6 months. And to be quite honest with you, right now there is a lot of activity. I think there's been COVID fatigue on behalf of business owners that have probably gone through 9/11, gone through the Great Recession, and now have gone through COVID, and where they may not have been thinking of selling their business for another 5 to 7 years, they're really looking. And there's just a lot of money in the marketplace right now. And so there's a lot of dollars chasing private company acquisitions. So we are dealing with this almost on a daily basis. And all you can do is be honest with them. The area of expertise, the area that I personally find difficult is to articulate to them their failure to protect their IP and their IT. I think those two elements are so critical. And frankly, when you're running a business, you're out there chasing sales, you want to satisfy your customers, and you're not looking necessarily at the infrastructure of the business that you've built. And that's where the earlier you can get the right advisors in to help you put those, those mitigating factors in place, the more attractive you're going to be as a target to a potential buyer. Because what happens is during the deal conversations, you may look attractive to a buyer, and then when they start peeling back the onion and they start seeing the deficiencies in your internal controls, the fact that your technology is not protected, the fact that there was a cyber attack 6 months ago and your client's information was taken, that deal price starts dwindling and getting smaller and smaller, and then so we do see that. So any opportunity I have personally to talk to business owners or advisors to business owners, I always lead with those 3 questions. Every decision you make, is it going to help me increase my cash flows? Is it going to help me grow the business? Or is it going to mitigate risk? And if the answer is yes to any one of those, you're working towards increasing the value of your business.
Okay. Well, that's going to be very helpful for the business owners that are going to be watching this video, and I appreciate that. That was great advice and great information. Stay with us, because towards the end of this, we're going to be asking you perhaps some other questions.
Will do.
Okay, so you mentioned two things, IP and IT. Those are two of the areas that we're going to be speaking about in this video. And I understand that there are missed opportunities to create perceived value in intellectual property assets. And Howard Kline is going to tell us about that. Howard, what can you tell us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to focus on trademarks mainly. I run our trademark department. One of the biggest thing for any client that's going to file or obtain a trademark protection, I advise, is you need to find a strong, distinctive, but also available trademark. And that's the big thing. And going forward, the first step that's often a missed opportunity is just conducting your basic trademark clearance search. So up front, trademark rates are really based on use in commerce. I get clients all the time that reach out to me saying, hey, I took a look at the trademark database, the trademark's available, I'm going to file it. That's great. It may be available, but there could also be a party using the same trademark in Washington state for the past 20 years. You start using it, you don't know about them, and then you have a problem on your hands. So up front, the idea is to take a close look to see whether your trademark is available, and if it's available, to protect it by filing a federal trademark application. By filing that federal application, you get a constructive first use date throughout the country as of the date of filing. So that's really powerful. You can have the right to use, the right to register, and really use the trademark as a shield against other parties. The other big thing that's a missed opportunity that I see that I'm sure Elman may talk a little bit about is really upfront. It's not only about filing that trademark application, but making sure the domain names are available, making sure social media handles are available. Because when you file that trademark application, it's public record. And what I've seen is 3 days after you file the application, you get parties that buy up each of the domain names for those trademarks and then try to sell them back to you for, let's say, $2,000, which is going to be less expensive than litigating, but just way too much money. So really obtaining the social media handles and domain names is a critical missed opportunity. Also, the Amazon brand registry. More and more business is being done online. If you have a federal trademark registration for goods, you can report that with Amazon and your product will appear at the top of the search hits. Finally, enforcement. Just because you have a trademark registration doesn't mean other parties can't use trademarks in commerce. You need to take that registration and then enforce it, whether it be cease and desist letters, trademark infringement lawsuits, et cetera. Also going into the fact of use online, it's really in the past, trademark rights, even now, they're based on the country it's being used. So if you have a trademark registration, that's limited to the United States. When you're selling online, you probably have customers all around the world. So filing those international trademark registrations can be incredibly important. And there are avenues out there that are available, the Madrid Protocol being one of them, to be able to file at a lower cost and obtain protection throughout the world. And then the last thing I'll mention at this point is recording your chain of title. For businesses, it's very important. If there are changes of name, assignments, conversions, if you don't record that with the US Trademark Office, and then you proceed to file trademark renewals in the name of the wrong entity, your trademark is susceptible to cancellation. And we had an instance where we represented a small client and were able to cancel a multi-billion-dollar bank's trademark registration for the name of their bank on the basis that they did not record their chain of title and filed in the wrong name. So that's very important, and that can really impact value of a company when you get to the point of sales acquisitions. If your trademarks are just not really in the wrong name, they're susceptible to cancellation.
So that raises an interesting question. How much of a role does the trademark actually play when it comes to valuing a business?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to say. It's an intangible asset, right? But really, the trademark can be one of the most powerful assets that you have, most valuable assets you have, because it's how consumers view you as a company. But for your trademark, your customers wouldn't be able to distinguish you from party X, party Y, party Z. So really, that trademark, especially if you're able to enforce it and really monitor other parties' uses to try to avoid dilution of your brand, if you're able to do that, it can be an incredibly valuable asset.
Okay, one other question for you, and that is trademark theft. Let's talk about China.
Yep.
There certainly are companies in China that come very close to having trademarks that are identical to US companies. How is that managed? How do you manage that kind of problem?
It's becoming a bigger issue every day. In September of 2019, of the nearly 70,000 applications filed in the United States, 30,000 were filed by Chinese applicants. They're largely nonsense letters and numbers put together that are used for the Amazon brand registry and really preventing other parties from using marks in the United States. So really the way to go about it is that there are ways to attack those trademark registrations because by and large, they're not being used in commerce. So by engaging a counsel, you can file what's called an opposition proceeding, cancellation proceeding, and allege non-use, abandonment of the trademarks, fraud on the US Trademark Office. But when protecting your mark in China, it gets more difficult because unlike the United States, China is a first to file jurisdiction. So if you're the first one to file, you file it. Unless you can really prove that your trademark is famous, which is a difficult burden in China, it can be an uphill battle to protect your rights in China.
Where are the other countries that are the biggest thieves of intellectual property regarding trademarks in the world? Can you name some of those countries?
It's difficult to call. I don't know if I call it thieves, but really the highest filers, it's China. You have issues in India as well, a little bit in Brazil, but it's mainly China, and that's a jurisdiction that it keeps us busy as IP practitioners. But their population is only growing, and they're filing at unseen rates. So China is the real big one.
I should mention that our panelists, their contact information will appear at the end of this video. And thanks, Howard. There'll probably be some other questions for you as we move along. I'm going to move on to Darek. Darek, tell us a little bit about what you do and how it plays a role regarding business valuations.
Thanks, Bruce. I think, I was sitting here thinking that I'm more tactical in my thinking as far as this goes. And having experienced the fallout of not having good IT systems, maturity, as I would call it, in the impact of your sale. So, for example, we had a client who acquired about a $5 million company, a revenue company, and after the close, they realized they had not done their due diligence on the IT side, and it cost them almost $1 million to restructure their IT. So that was a lose for the buyer. I could tell you that buyer now, who's a client of ours, has a whole IT process now, right? They're making sure that they evaluate that because they see that huge cost. And I think that's becoming more and more clear today with the cybersecurity that Mandeep brought up. That, with cybersecurity being such an issue and that protection being such an issue, people are becoming more aware of the IT infrastructure and how that's being handled, how it's being managed. Is it mature? Is it, as we in our industry call it, spaghetti wired? Just stuff hanging all over the place and no protections. And when you see that, I always think, whether it's in IT or in the financials or anything else, we've gone through an acquisition where we looked at it. And as we started to see all those personal things in the financials, we started to ask more questions. We started to question their being honest about things, and they didn't have it prepared. To Mandy's point, is having all of that information up front and clear. And as we dug deeper, we ended up finding a bunch of other stuff that was being included in the business, right? And so their valuation just kept going down, 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 down. So I think having that, I think overall, I think everybody here would say the same thing. It's the planning part of it. Even if you're only going to do 6 months, get on it and plan it. And I wrote down a little note here saying it's the difference of working in the business and on the business. If you've been so busy working in the business and you don't take a step out and work on the business and put that structure in place, it's going to impact your valuation. And I'm a big one about IT maturity because people know today what IT maturity is. And if you have things patched together, people are going to see it. And it's going to create a problem for you during the valuation process.
So at what point do you go in to do that kind of an evaluation? When does a company realize that it's time to bring you in?
So it's interesting. So I like to say there's this process that companies go through when you're a mom and pop kind of small organization. You have your brother's uncle's kid doing your IT. And a lot of companies then go from, which by the way, I think is the right thing to do when you're startup and you have to bootstrap and you're getting yourself started. But the next step is where they make the mistake. They basically hire somebody or a company to do exactly what the kid was doing. And that's not mature IT. That's somebody who doesn't know corporate structure, doesn't know organization, and they're going to keep you running, but you're going to get farther and farther behind the 8 ball as you get farther down the road. And typically when we really see a problem is when you're, 50 or 100 users and you're starting to have significant revenue and you're thinking about selling or thinking about getting investment money, and they start to see where everybody who is engaged is looking at them kind of askance at their spaghetti wire hanging out of the ceiling. And that's where we tend to come involved. We do what we call IT roadmaps for those companies, where we do look at their structure. How are they spending compared to other industries? What are people going to look at when they come to them? Do a cybersecurity audit, have all of that structure looked at, and then provide a roadmap to get them to the place they need to be.
So some of us have been in gas lines recently, trying to get gasoline because of the shutdown of the pipeline. Some of you may have experienced that. And that was because of this ransom against the pipeline. And so I guess the best question I can ask regarding that is, so Darek, how susceptible to that risk is corporate America today? And going down to even small, closely held businesses. Is that a major risk, or is that like lightning striking?
Well, so it's a major risk if you don't think about it, plan about it, and take care of it. It's not a major risk if you've done the work. So ransomware is an interesting thing. It is very easy to avoid ransomware. And we say this all the time, is if you back up your local machine, and if somebody gets ransomware on a machine, they just shut the machine down, wipe the machine, start over, and back up all the data, and you're good to go. The problem is two things: is you don't train your employees, so employees click on the links. To me, that's one of the simple things. I mean, there are tools out there that are $1 or $2 per user per month to get training, so people learn not to. I think the last number I read was somewhere north of 80% of cybersecurity ransomware issues are end user mistakes, not intentional. They clicked on a link and it started a whole path. And then the other is just not having the process in place, not being prepared and thinking about what will happen if this happens. I mean, this is, I think a lot of industries are starting to wake up to the fact that IT can't be a cost center anymore. It has to be a value add. You have to look at it as a value add. And if you think of it as a cost center and think of, I don't want to spend money on it, you'll end up in the situation that the pipeline group was in. And I'm really grateful that I have an electric car today. Sorry.
So when you're doing an analysis of a company, you're going in and you're doing your cybersecurity audit, I guess you call it. What does that look like? What are you looking for? What are the top things that you're examining, and how do they impact value?
So I would start with, we don't do cybersecurity audit. So we do day-to-day cybersecurity work. So it's monitoring things, managing firewalls. I like to say that the function of a cybersecurity audit should be the function of the auditor in accounting. Okay. You don't want me auditing me, right? The cybersecurity function should be somebody coming in and auditing me and saying, your company's not doing X, Y, Z, and you need to get this stuff under wraps and fix it, right? Okay. That is the function of cybersecurity. And that cybersecurity audit can be so many things today. It's an interesting field because it's so wide open. There's what we call pen testing, which is just from the outside trying to get into a network. It's compliance, it's training, there's so many components to it that it can be overwhelming for a small business. But I think if you match yourself with the right cybersecurity firm, I always say match your size with your size. So if you're a $5 million company, find a $5 million cybersecurity firm. Don't go to Deloitte & Touche. If you're a big company, Deloitte might be the right solution for you. But if you match with the right size, they're going to give you the price and they're going to give you the things you need to be secure.
Right.
And I just want to repeat this again. If you're going to do anything on the cybersecurity side, train your employees.
Okay, it's good to know. What else would you like to add?
I would just add that, it's the unseen thing that can create value. If it's going to be easy for me as an acquirer to merge you into my company because your IT systems are up to par, it makes a big difference, right? If I only have to spend, I don't know, a month of time migrating you because you've moved to the cloud, because you have everything structured, because you're organized, because you're mature, it makes my integration of you much easier. So I think from a tactical standpoint, thinking about taking a step back, 6 months prior to sale, what is going to make it easiest for this company that's going to acquire me to bring me into their company, and use that as a selling point. That can add some value to your company as you try to sell. That would be it.
Moving along, Elman, tell us about your business and what role you play in business valuations.
Definitely. So first of all, this has been amazing just listening to everyone, and everyone has some great things that are going on. My name is Elman Woodson. I'm principal at Woodson Law. And in Woodson Law, we focus on small to mid-sized businesses that are primarily just getting started, all the way up to the point of acquisition, where they're considering buying other businesses. A lot of my clients they've been in business for a number of years. I help them get set up, help them create their operating agreements and all those different types of things, and get them to the point where they are considering acquiring something else. But what I found is that in a lot of cases, because I'm an attorney, I have to think with the end in mind. And a lot of cases, a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily think with the end in mind. They usually have what's called shiny object syndrome, which is like something new is happening, I'm going to go do this. Something new is happening, I'm going to go do that. And then the problem is that what I like to stress to them, which has been said so eloquently by Mandeep, Darek, and Howard, is that structure has to be established. At some point, structure has to be established so that they can put themselves in a position to enhance their valuation when it comes time for that. Especially when you have the mom and pop businesses who think that they're just going to do the same thing for a long time. But when money starts coming in, and then they recognize, hey, we're doing really well here, and they start to have more income and more opportunity presents itself. If they haven't put that structure in, it makes it more difficult to get the proper valuation that they would have otherwise wanted to get, because they didn't necessarily have their books in order. They didn't necessarily set up a structure in terms of their C-suite, or they didn't put in place any SOPs, any standard operating procedures. All of those little things go a long way in terms of determining valuation. And if they're not taken into consideration at the very beginning, I mean, for example, I have one client now, she's just starting her business, and I had stressed her, we definitely need to have the operating agreements. We need to have standard operating procedures. Well, her question was, why do we need to have that? It's just me and a few friends just getting it. Because at a certain point, when the business starts flowing and you have employees and you have business you're going after, if you don't have at least those things in place that you can revise at a certain point, it makes it more difficult to have to start from the beginning and not, and have to create them on the fly. So you want to at least take those things into consideration at the very beginning. So think with the end in mind is one of the things that I usually always say to my clients. The other thing is that recognize who's your client, who's your target audience. For example, this is exactly following up on what Mandeep was saying. Who's your target audience? Who's your client? When you have a business, everyone out here is not your client. Your client is going to be a specific person or certain groups of people. Identify those. Identify where your strengths are. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was saying, we were just this is so random, but he was talking about the fact that when a person like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, do they work on their strengths or their weaknesses? And I said, maybe their weaknesses. He's like, no, they work on their strengths. They focus on the things that they're good at, and they enhance those. They get better at that. And on the areas where they're weak, they find someone who can supplement that weakness, who they can bring on to buttress that weakness, or that proposed weakness. So take time to develop your strengths, develop your ideas about who your clients are, and then value them. Don't just so I have two little ones. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I teach them to say thank you, please, and thank you, right? But the question is, do we do that with our own clients? I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine and another business owner, and we were just talking generally about his clients. He was wondering why he hadn't had heard from another client, and the reason why was because he had done a large amount of business with them and did not say thank you. Simple things like that. Thank you. I appreciate the business. I look forward to doing more things with you. And just those little things can go such a long way. Now, I know that they're a little bit off the realm of law, which is what I do, but at the same time, those are very important things that are important. I'll just rehash a point that I had talked about a little earlier, which was making sure that the C-suite is complete, especially as you begin to grow. So for example, you need to have things like a CEO, a CFO, CMO, a CSO, CCO, CTO. Those C-suite, a full complete C-suite, are some of the elements that businesses will take into consideration as they're looking to purchase you. If they don't see those things, if they don't see the SOPs, again, the standard operating procedures, how are certain things done, they can utilize that to potentially decrease value in your business if you don't prepare yourself to potentially move into the area of being acquired or being merged. So not only do I mean, it's important to think, definitely from a legal perspective, and I always do, I think about the risks and how you can become more risk averse and think about those things. But at the same time, there are other things as well, the small things, the creating your SOPs and having the procedures in place, and having the key personnel ready and ready and willing and able to do their job and do their business. So, and then one other part that I think is very tremendously important is knowing your numbers, being able to understand what your numbers are, how many people you need to reach out to get to a certain point where it can actually turn to actual business. And then what do you do with that business and how do you massage those relationships? So, long way of saying I work with very small businesses from startup to all the way to growth, to eventual acquisition or distribution or mergers and things like that. So yeah, I am. So yeah, the most businesses that I work with have to take those things into consideration, and I just find that a lot of small businesses, when they first get started, just think that they can fly by the seat of their pants, or that they can be comfortable just figuring it out as they go. And in a lot of cases, it's best to start preparing yourself. Even like Howard said, with regards to your website and to the things like that, creating those things from the very beginning, establishing the structures. Because one thing that I say is that things need to be fixed, uniform, and universal, that you can utilize those things all the way throughout, utilize your structures, your business systems all the way throughout until you get to the point where a possible valuation is ready to occur.
Okay, so talking about valuation for a minute, non-compete agreements, I know that there are different laws in different states, but tell me, how important are those regarding employees, and how enforceable in general are those, and what impact do they have on the value of a business?
Yeah, so especially for key personnel, one thing that I tell key personnel is that you don't want to, especially business owners, you don't want to have the people who have been tied to the secrets of the business, who understand the knowledge of the business, who understand the fundamentals of the business, to go somewhere and start their own. Now, the non-compete agreements are very important because you can put a limitation on them for a reasonable amount of time. Generally, it's 2 years, 3 years, but you don't want to have anything that's above that. You start to push against the realm of reasonableness, and so what happens is that you create these non-compete agreements so that you can continue to do business, because you don't want you don't want those key personnel going out taking half the staff to start their own thing and completely compete against you and go into your competitors, your manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, and taking all that business. So yes, they are enforceable, but they have to be well crafted so that they are reasonable and reasonably tied to the person who they're meant for. Because at the same time that you don't want them taking business, you also don't want to prevent them from being able to work and being able to supply, to take care of themselves. So it has to be reasonable. The other day I saw one where it was drafted that said for the next 10 years, I don't know who wrote this, but for the next 10 years, nowhere in America, it was the most crazily written non-compete agreement I've ever seen, but it was written in such a way that this person couldn't do anything even in that industry anywhere. And that's just, very, very difficult to enforce. So
That was the question, was it enforceable? So you think not reasonable?
not reasonable. I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be a level of reasonableness about this,
Right.
because the thing is that people have to be able to supply for themselves. If their industry is that one thing, and that's all they do, you preventing them from starting their own company is reasonable. You preventing them from being in that area for a certain amount of time that gives you time to continue to build your business is reasonable. So it has to be a level of reasonableness that's taken into consideration, and on all parties, So yeah, that's very important, and I see those are drafted especially for key personnel who are tied to the nuts and bolts of the business. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Okay, one other question for you before we move into some general questions would be, you have a small company, you have two partners. And-
Myself, a solo practitioner, and I have some associates. I'm actually going to be interviewing a person here after this call. So
Okay, so a small company, a couple of partners, and there's no cross purchase agreement, there's no stock repo agreement, anything like that.
no.
One of the persons gets hit by a truck, is out of the picture, and now the other partner is partners with the spouse. What does that do to a business value, and how do you avoid that problem?
That's very, very interesting. And those are things that actually need to be written into the business, even to the operating agreements, to the agreements of the company. So for example, and I actually had a client who had that happen. But what we did was we drafted his agreement such that if anything were to happen to him, it's not that the partner will be able to, we could buy out we get the first right of refusal. So we get the opportunity to buy out his spouse, so that way we could continue on with the business. Now, this person, his spouse had no knowledge about what their business was because it was IT. They had no background in the IT field. They had no first. So them coming on as a key component player in the business, it really literally doesn't make sense. So we wrote it such that they had the first right of refusal to buy them out, give them a decent package that would be able to take care of them and sustain them. But I have seen situations where that particular thing happens, then you have a spouse that comes in and have no knowledge about what exactly goes into the business, has no knowledge about the work that it takes, has no knowledge about building up any partnerships or anything like that, and has, I don't want to say, for lack of better words, I mean, nothing to bring to the table, but it's just that their familiarity with the business is slim to none. So those things actually hurt businesses. So those are things that, again, we have to think with the end in mind when it comes to drafting agreements, when it comes to developing a business, developing the structure, and making sure that even family members don't come in and just sideline the business because of their lack of knowledge. So yeah, those are very important things to think about and take into consideration.
Thanks very much, appreciate that. Couple of general questions for the panel. One is, we're going into a year where there's a lot of uncertainty. Are corporate rates going to go up? What's going to happen because of breakdowns in supply chain? What's going to happen in the areas of unemployment and the changes in that? So what impact, where do you see all of this going regarding your field and also the valuations of businesses going forward? Howard, I'm going to start with you. What's your general impression of all of that?
My general impression is, at least on the trademark and copyright side, filings have never been higher. I think part of that is, one, trademarks and copyrights, it's really reasonable, right? So the government filing fee to file a trademark application can be as little as $250 per class. If you file that application, you obtain a registration, that trademark can be maintained as an incredibly valuable asset of your company, potentially forever, so long as you use the trademark in commerce, so long as you file various renewals. So really what I'm seeing is entities, just as real estate, the value of real estate's increasing, the value of intangible assets such as trademarks, copyrights, patents are also increasing. And by putting in just a little bit of effort up front, a little bit of money up front, you can really obtain an incredibly valuable asset for your company at a low cost.
So you're saying, as I'm hearing you, that the opportunity for growth is very strong now, rather than weak. Would that be a good way of saying what you're saying?
I think so. I think the internet is really where it's all at right now. Everybody's doing business on the internet. People are in front of their computers all day, not leaving their house, ordering stuff online.
Right.
Counterfeits are at all-time highs. So really there's really incredible value and importance to really police your mark online, protect yourself around the world, and the benefits can be very, very high.
Mandeep, what do you think?
It's an interesting question. It's a loaded question. You know, there is so much uncertainty, and yet the market is hotter than it's ever been. I mean, the number of deals that are coming to us on a daily basis is probably threefold what it was prior to COVID, and that was a very hot market at that time. There is something in the air, and there's been something in the air for, I would say, the last 7 years, where the price of what people are paying for businesses and the actual value, which is the world I live in, is so disparate. And it's really where price is higher than value. And what's driving it is just demand. There is so much money out there looking for good investments. That hasn't changed. So the threat of inflation, the uncertainty regarding unemployment, you know, the employment market is very interesting because we have a lot of clients in the hospitality space that can't get their workers back in the door because the benefits that they're receiving right now are just are close enough that they don't have to kill themselves for 12 hours a day, you know, in the back of a restaurant or, you know, servicing a hotel, for example. And so we are really seeing, you know, that's going to be an industry that's really going to struggle for a little while, because even though the world might open up, the staff to support, you know, that revenue that everyone's hoping is going to come back in a flurry, it isn't there. We've actually even seen folks in that space going through the COVID experience saying, you know, I'm a chef, I work 12 hours a day. I like being home. I've enjoyed being home. I see my kids. Maybe I'm going to teach, maybe I'm going to do something else. So it's going to be, the employment market's going to be very, very interesting because there's so many different factors driving that. Obviously, the COVID impact of businesses shutting down, but getting people back into the workforce and into the offices, for that matter, is going to be interesting. And yet, businesses are having their doors knocked on a regular basis. You know, clients that weren't even thinking about selling their business are coming to us and saying, you know, so and so called and they threw out a number that I never thought. You know, I never thought. I don't know. Is it a right number? Is it the wrong number? So we do some analysis for them. And all of a sudden, that number's not good enough for them. And they want to push that number up. And then they start going out to the marketplace. So despite all the uncertainty in any other environment, I would tell you that, you know, prices would be coming down. I just don't see it. And I don't see that activity slowing down for another 12 to 18 months unless, you know, we have another second wave. I think what COVID did is it didn't stop private equity, it didn't stop investors, it just put a pause. And those businesses that have been able to sustain themselves, maybe not grow, maybe not even be, you know, necessarily cash flow positive, but be able to sustain themselves, management who is able to pivot on a dime, these businesses are very, very attractive now. They're very, very attractive because they were able to sustain themselves through such a crisis. So it's a very interesting marketplace, and it's across just about every industry, I would say, other than hospitality, where we're seeing a lot of activity. In the hospitality space, you know, Howard's area of work is so critical, so important, you know, protecting the brand, the name. We're seeing a lot of people paying for a lot of intangible assets. So as scary as the world seems right now, and as nerve-wracking as it seems, I just don't see it slowing down.
Okay. Darek, when you look at the economy, do you see it as a glass half full or half empty?
Don't ask me that question because I always see the glass full. There's air in the glass. So I probably am the weirdest person to have gone through COVID because I thought it was a great opportunity. You know, obviously I'm saddened for the people that have been impacted significantly for it. Our industry luckily was not impacted because everybody went to working from home and we had to jump on that, and we've had opportunities because other competitors didn't jump on it or didn't handle it well. But I think, you know, to your question is really what is going to happen going forward. We're seeing a lot of activity, but I've been saying this to it's going to be an up and down next 10, 12 to 18 months. I just watched an article or a video Wall Street Journal put out last night about the shipping container business, because I had some partners who were in that business, and the pricing of a container, can't remember what the size is, like a 20-foot container, used to be $3,000 to $4,000 to get it shipped from Asia to the US. It's now $16,000. And it's because of what someone else said about the online ordering, is we've ordered all this stuff from elsewhere, your Pelotons and all the other stuff. It's coming into the US ports. They can't unload it quick enough, and there's nothing to fill it up with to go back. So you're now paying for an empty boat going back. And until that gets rebalanced, which I think it will, it's just going to be an up and down cycle where we're going to have, you know, different parts of the economy are going to come back, and then, you know, kind of level off, and then another part will catch up, and it's really that supply chain piece that's how quickly it can catch up. I think from an opportunity standpoint, from, you know, the acquisition, I think Mandeep may have said it, that, you know, it's really how prepared are you for when somebody comes knocking on your door. You know, it's amazing to me how many people aren't prepared for that. Like we've had somebody come to us, and we took the idea, as Elman mentioned, of being prepared. We bought our company 4 years ago. Part of our process was to make sure that our financials were gapped and all the pieces were in place, so that if somebody comes knocking on our door, we could hand them information and get a good valuation. And to everybody's point, the valuations are astronomical right now. In our industry, especially, cybersecurity is off the charts. That you just, how can you not listen, right? And you need to be prepared to listen and have educated yourself enough to be prepared. So I think really that getting yourself out of the day-to-day, if you're a business owner, and realizing this is an opportunity. And my personal belief, this is totally uneducated guess, is you've got about 2 to 3 years before something's going to happen, because we've dumped a bunch of money in the economy. We've tried to manage it, but the economy is going to have to reset. And so if you really are at that point where you're ready to make a change, this is the time to do it. That's my point of view.
Let me ask you a question. Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptocurrencies, what impact are they going to have on the economy and on business valuations in general? What's your sense of that?
Wow. Good old Bitcoin, man. I tell you, you can never quite get away from Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is here to stay. I don't see Bitcoin going anywhere. However, I believe Elon Musk said something the other day, and it caused Bitcoin to crash. Not crash, but it has reduced the value of Bitcoin. And then you had an interesting situation with Dogecoin, where I don't know if it was Elon Musk or someone said something about Dogecoin, and that skyrocketed through the roof. So the thing about it is that people, you can, just from that experience, and even coupled with everything we're saying, you can tell people are looking for ways to increase value. People are looking for ways to invest their money, and they're looking for non-traditional ways. And Bitcoin is one of those ways. Bitcoin is one of those ways that people see as being here as something, as an alternative to the dollar, as an alternative to regular currency trading or stock trading. And so these things are, and the thing about it is that they're starting to have more and more of an effect on how we do business, on how we operate. You know, other countries have ATMs that have Bitcoin ATMs. And listen, that's not too far from our shores. That's not too far from being here in this country. And so it's an interesting question, because it's multifaceted. But Bitcoin and the alternative currencies are beginning to affect us in ways that we didn't otherwise think about or plan for. And as they become more mainstream, and specifically in other countries, because it may be, the US may be the last to actually approve of something like this, but as they become more mainstreamed in other countries, and other countries start to utilize it, to actually utilize it as a method of trade and transfer, it's going to be very difficult for people to say that it doesn't hold some sort of value and some sort of weight. So I mean, it's one of those things that it's here to stay. It's taking more and more of a foothold in the financial industry, and I'm curious to see where it goes myself. So
As we all are.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about
Can I add something to that, Bruce?
it.
Yes.
That it's funny. I went to Europe in 2001, and they had these little handheld things that they brought to my table when I was at a restaurant, and you stuck your credit card in it, and we paid with a code, not with a signature.
Yeah,
It's
see?
taken the pandemic for us to have that here in the US.
Yeah.
I think the similar happening in Bitcoin, and I was fascinated on Bitcoin to see this year when one of the newest NFL players wanted Bitcoin instead of cash.
Right.
That tells me there's a change.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
And I
later
think-
on he backed away from that position, by the way.
Yes, I know.
He may have realized it was a little bit risky.
But can I say something to that point? To Derek's
Sure.
point, is so true. In a way, COVID was a terrible situation for our country, but in a way, it was almost like a wake up call for business. It was a wake up call for finance. It was a wake up call for all the industries that we have. I mean, just think about how much COVID shut our economy down. But when it did, people were home, and as they were home, they stayed on their computers, so they started to have access to things that they weren't otherwise seeing. So for example, instead of me commuting to my job, I was sitting here at my computer, utilizing that time getting things done. But when I had downtime, I was looking at different things that I wouldn't have otherwise looked at or taken into consideration. And so that's the reason we're in this place where, for example, business acquisitions is up probably at all-time high. Bitcoin is at an all-time, real estate is at an all-time high, because people are now awakened to these alternative opportunities that they may not have thought about, or they may have thought about in a lot. Like, so for example, one thing was home improvement. Home improvement went through the roof because people were home and they started to see, oh, there's a crack in the wall, I need to fix that. And so they started to increase. So now lumber is off the charts. The price of lumber is off the charts. And so people are looking at things differently now because of the situation that we had, and COVID brought that out. And so when you have things like Bitcoin, it's one of those things that now it's taken more of a foothold in our economy, because not only we're sitting here talking about it, but it's starting to become more normalized in daily conversation. And as it becomes more normalized, it's going to seep into the traditional financial structures that we may not have thought it would. And so that's what I want to say with that.
Thanks very much for that. Howard, I'm going to give you the last thought here. Elman was saying we've all been home, and we've had time to think about other things. And so all those people out there with career ADD are coming up with new ideas, and new businesses. Have you seen a jump in trademark registrations since COVID?
Absolutely. I mean, it really depends on the field, right? So to an extent, your standard restaurants and hospitality type stuff has decreased, obviously. On the other hand, we have gyms that are filing for virtual gym classes through the roof. Hand sanitizer masks through the roof. So, I mean, to an extent, yes. I mean, there are entrepreneurs filing at a very, very high rate at this point. And it's really just a matter of getting that trademark on file as soon as possible, right? Because something that a lot of people don't realize is if you can file an intent to use trademark application. So if you have this great idea that you're going to establish this business, you can file that intent to use basis and get a constructive first use date throughout the United States as of the date you file it. You don't have to actually come to market in order to obtain that.
Good to hear. Well, this has been a really interesting panel, I must say. I'd like to thank all of you for some great insights. It's been a lot of fun. Your contact information will be available to those viewing this later. And with that being said, we're at the top of the hour now. I'd like to thank Nath Goldberg and Meyer for sponsoring this panel. Thank you very much, Howard. And I'd like to thank all of you for being with us today. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a great day. Thanks.